So in this video, I'm going to talk about apoptosis. So it's important to remember that apoptosis and mitosis are essentially opposites. So mitosis increases cells, and apoptosis decreases cell number. And so apoptosis is defined as programmed, there's two M's in there, cell death. And so essentially you could think of it as like the cell is committing suicide. It wants, the cell is programmed to die. And apoptosis, believe it or not, it's a genetic program and it's very predictable. And what I mean by that is the steps are predictable. An example of this is humans are born with webbing between their fingers. So imagine there's a horribly drawn hand and there's webbing inside. And so the fingers go down to there. And then apoptosis decreases the number of cells and results in cell death around there to separate the fingers to eventually get a hand like this. And so now let's talk about the steps of apoptosis. Let me clear this. So the first step is a normal cell, if it wants to undergo apoptosis, it's going to separate from other cells. So it essentially just goes off on its own. The second step is right here. The cell kind of shrinks, shrivels up a little bit, and the nucleus collapses. So that's step 2. Step 3, the cell nucleus becomes very dark, and then the DNA condenses more tightly, and then the cell breaks apart, forming blebs, which are fragments of DNA. Fragments of the cell, sorry. And then, so, an enzyme called DNase attacks the DNA to break it down. And then other cells can absorb or remove the fragments of the cell that underwent apoptosis. And so you may ask, what and how, like, what substance actually breaks down the cells? Well, let me clear this. There are things called caspases. And what they are apoptotic enzymes that can be unleashed by internal or external signals. And essentially these caspases destroy the enzyme, the cell. And they're usually held in check by inhibitors. So an internal signal in the cell is something that essentially is a signal that occurs inside the cell that tells it to undergo apoptosis, and external is a signal that comes from outside the cell. They generally occur at the same time, but usually what happens is a death ligand. So let me clear all of this. So what happens is, here's a cell, here's a receptor, and a death ligand binds to the receptor. And so that essentially activates the apoptosis, and it leads to all of the steps and results ultimately in the death of a cell. But however, inside, that's a mitochondria. And you could activate the mitochondria from the inside to result in apoptosis as well. And so what happens if apoptosis is not functioning normally? Well, if you have too little cell death, there can result in, let me clear that. If you have too little cell death, that could result in cancer because not the right cells are dying. Too much cell death can lead to Alzheimer's and Huntington's disease. And so that's pretty much a summary of apoptosis. And generally, the cell will undergo apoptosis if the DNA is damaged and the repair doesn't work. If DNA is, we'll say, permanently damaged,